Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Budget Day. Welcome to the news agenda. And today I'm joined by my fellow Mirror columnist and associate editor Kevin Maguire, live from the Mirror's office in Parliament. Good afternoon, Kev.
Hi, Foxy. You're going to get a penny off a pint, so you can drink to that.
Penny of fun. If only I drank draft ale. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to ask yourself if government doing what it said it would do before you voted for it is, in fact, even if you don't like the things it's doing, actually still a good thing. So what have we got for you today? Well, of course, unless you've been under a rock, Rachel Reeves has today delivered the first Labour budget for 14 years and the first ever budget by a woman. And ahead of her speech, the Mirror this morning was reporting on an increase to the minimum wage and trailing bits of the Chancellor's speech, quoting how she was going to say it had fallen to Labour to rebuild Britain yet again, as it had done after the Second World War and so on. But before she stood up, the Deputy Speaker, Nusrat Ghani, took her to task, as Speaker Lindsay Hoyle did before PMQs as well. And I want to dig into this a bit before we get into the content of the budget, Kevin, because the messaging, how they have approached this budget has been quite interesting. I think the reasons for some of this might have passed people by a bit while everyone's, banging on about taxes. So let's start with the fact, a few months ago, we saw a government with very poor messaging. It seemed to be in disarray. It was caught on the hop all the time by silly scandals that should have been avoided. Even last week in Samoa, we had government officials briefing out the wrong thing about free ports in the agenda when they weren't. And it didn't seem really very professional. But here now, we've got the Speaker and Deputy Speaker absolutely purple in the face that the world is hearing budget announcements before Parliament. And that sounds to me like quite a slick PR operation is underway, at least in the Treasury. Has the machine got a bit better, do you think?
I think it has been. Yeah, I think it has actually, Foxy, on this budget been a bit better. The reason you brief it out in advance never used to happen. Hugh Dalton, the Labour Chancellor in 1947, spoke to a reporter on a London papers who was going in the chamber and talked about money on fags and beer, and he had to resign. That doesn't happen now. Budget purdah. They say nothing is completely gone. The last Tory budget, Jeremy Hunt, was no rabbits out of the hat. What Labour's done is, because it's been locked up for 2 weeks, this budget, so the Office for Budget Responsibility could run over the figures, is it decided to get some positive headlines and get some bad news out the way. And I think that's quite the sensible way to go here. And Nusrat Ghani, the Deputy Speaker, had a lot of time for her. She can go purple in the face as much as she wants. She's not going to change how they behave, because this is serious politics, serious finances. And it's a very old concept that you should wait to tell MPs absolutely everything. You're addressing the wider public. That's what you're really doing, the electorate. People
as we saw, I think, with Liz Truss's mini budget, you also, in the modern world, you are addressing global markets. And if you say the wrong thing, or they hear the wrong thing, or they hear it done in the wrong way, or all are taken by surprise, as they were with Liz Truss's budget, they have an enormous moment of indigestion, which causes huge chaos. And then it becomes linked to the budget. And the narrative is the budget's done this, we're doomed. Whereas if they can kind of get some of the bad stuff out earlier, for example, that we had about national insurance contributions, the markets have their little moment of indigestion and then it's gone. And then by the time the budget is delivered, the markets are actually glad to get the thing they were worried about, because that's where they had gambled we were going to be. And when they find they are there, they go, oh, thank God for that. We haven't lost as much money as we would have done if we'd just been taken by surprise.
No, that's absolutely right. If the casino capitalists of the markets, if they're going to be how you judge yourself by the stock market, the initial response was the stock market was slightly up. The cost of government borrowing was down a smidgen. And so that all looked rather good. And you're right about get the bad news out of the way when you can explain it fully, rather than just one big splurge on the day where, for instance, the good news of the minimum wage going up by more than inflation, that was just announced today in the budget, that would have been lost. It wouldn't get much attention, while people 6 p.m. onwards last night could read, hear, see about it. So I just think it's I could see, if you are the Speaker or the Deputy Speaker, why you get frustrated in the House of Commons. But I think actually the way it's done now is better. You get more information out. And some of it was briefed in advance. You're quite right. Some of it was, let's call it poor journalism. Some of the stuff that was was wrong. Certainly, like, for instance, taxing employers' contributions to pensions, changing the size of the tax-free pension fund, changing the rate of tax relief on your pension. None of that was in there. And it wouldn't have been in the budget for more than 2 weeks. Of course, they kick around lots of ideas in advance, and you get research carried out on the impact of policies. That's how you do it. That's how you do your sums and work out what will happen. But it doesn't mean you're going to actually do it.
No, exactly. So the journalist hears that some research has been done, or someone's asked the question, they go, "Oh, this is going in the budget," and unless you can kind of confirm that, it's going to end up looking bad. So, I mean, what do you think, everybody? Do you think this is something that Parliament should have been told about first? Or do you think that in the 21st century, it's something the markets do actually need to react to ahead of time so that they don't have a moment of panic, which causes us all to lose, something or other somewhere along the way? Are they doing it better? Is the machine operating a bit better in favour of the government, do you think? Get into the comments and let us know. Now, there's one thing, as you said, Kev, which was quite widely reported, and that was briefed out. It's definitely reported, in which Reeves has surprised people, I think, by saying she was not going to do it. Now, she decided to spend £3 billion freezing fuel duty, something which was reported everywhere that she was going to do, to the extent that my mum went out yesterday and filled up the tank because she didn't want to pay 7p at the pumps after that bloody Labour Chancellor has done this. Now, Kev, is that because do you think the political reporters got it wrong? Or is it, if we're thinking about a more professional PR machine, that maybe when they were flying all these kites, they kind of smuggled one in, which they knew was never going to happen, but they wanted it to go up so that when it never really landed, the budget actually looked better than it is?
Yeah, as somebody who once had most of the budget leaked to me in a whole load of discarded press releases back in, I think it was 1986, I found since a lot of budget so-called leaks are people who are not directly involved. They're people who think they know what's in the budget, and so they tell people, and then you write it, and they're not always right, because fuel duty, that decision will have been taken at least 2 weeks ago not to go ahead with the inflation increase or end the temporary, as it's called, 5p cut in duty, which actually many motor organisations have never been passed on to motorists at the pumps, and in fact, actually, it's just been pocketed by the forecourt operators and the big petrol giants. But she clearly just did not want to, when she's raising employers' national insurance by so much, huge amount of more than 20 billion. She's just clearly thought, well, I'll be accused of hitting working people if I put up the cost of filling up a car or a van. Yeah, it's not. This hasn't been going up for at least 2 weeks.
Yeah, and she did say, didn't she, that she couldn't really justify it at a time that we've got now. Andy says she's upset the working man. Well, the working man's got a penny off pint of draft ale, Andy, and he's also got a freeze on fuel duty. So I have to see where the working man thing might go. I don't see how he can say that.
No.
I mean, it's one of the arguments we'll get to, won't we? That this is something that is being discussed right now, which is that Labour had promised in the manifesto they weren't going to tax working people. There's been argument what the definition of a working person was. The Tories are now trying to say they are taxing working people. What do you think, Kevin? All the stuff you saw there, are they hitting the working workers?
I've been going through the incredibly thick, detailed books you get with the budget and listening to Treasury officials being grilled, and the working man, let's say working people, because women work too.
Thank you.
But
work twice as hard quite often.
Yeah, she hasn't put up the income tax rate, or she hasn't put up the VAT rate or the national insurance rate. She's sticking with the Tory plan to freeze the threshold at which your tax bands work come into effect until 2028, but she's not going to extend them afterwards. It'll go by inflation. But the people who get hit are employers. I accept employers or workers who pay more in national insurance. If you're a non-domicile for tax reasons, you'll pay more. If you get a lot from capital gains tax, which very few people do, I think it's 350,000 people a year, they'll pay more. If you use a private jet, your passenger duty is up 50%. I think it's going up £2 on a short haul flight. I think Andy's not listened and studied it. Actually, I don't think the working man or woman or people will be particularly hit by this. And lower income households gain the most, including the value of services, and the ones who really pay are the top 10%. Well, I suppose there'll be some working men in that, but they are the higher earners.
Yeah. All right, Andy. Well, if you're still there, if you're still listening, get into the comments and let us know why you think the working man's being hit. Give us some examples. And he says, again, pubs are suffering. Well, one of the things that Rachel's doing is she's giving a 40% relief on business rates for hospitality. So pubs are going to benefit. And yes, someone else just mentioned, I think that, pints are £5 now. Yes, they are. But Rachel Reeves isn't charging you that. That's the brewery and the costs and the fuel and Russian war in Ukraine, all the rest of it. And she's giving you 1.7% off. So as long as it's on draft, you don't get it on a gin and tonic. Thanks, Rachel. Richard says, do you think we'll have a timetable now for reform policies, or will the many reviews be a restricting factor before we get the warm and fuzzies about how services or dignified life might be measurably better? We'll have to sort of see how the timetable pans out. I think some of it's probably going to depend on the parliamentary timetable for some of this stuff to be actually enacted. So Reeves was on her feet. She was on there talking for a long time, wasn't she? It was about an hour and 20 minutes. It was a massive budget, spending of about 70 billion, taxes of about 40 billion, and another Tory black hole of about 20 billion she's got to fill. And what stood out in it for you, Kevin?
Yeah, it's the biggest tax raising budget since 1993, Norman Lamont. I think it was 38.5 billion, but Ken Clarke the same year replaced him as Tory Chancellor and had his own, and the two combined were about 60 billion. I think the big winner is the NHS, the health service. The health secretary Wes Streeting, that big increase of 22.6 billion within 2 years, plus another 3.1 billion on capital spending, building hospitals, clinics, whatever. That is the big centerpiece of it. She did inherit poor public services, poor public financial position. But that is it. I think that's what stands out. The big plus, I think, is the NHS. The downside, I would say, Foxy, is actually economic growth. There's a bit of a sugar rush over the next 3 years, and growth will be higher than was forecast under the Conservatives. But then it drops back again 3 years after that. The Labour goal in the manifesto, you call it a promise if you like, one of Keir Starmer's missions was the highest sustained economic growth in the G7. The world's richer, bigger democratic economies. Well, we'll only get the highest sustained growth in the G7 if the other 6 economies collapse.
So all this stuff that she's talking about, the extra spending that's going to improve growth, this, that, and the other, it should make things slightly better. But I mean, it's not going to make us all stinking rich.
No. I was looking at the figures. Interest rates could go up a bit before they start coming down. Wage growth could be reduced. Unemployment a little tick, then it'll come down. Employment rates will sort of bump along. There's not going to be from the national employer, the national insurance, the employers' interest. There's not going to be a great mass chuck out in the labour market, basically because firms need staff to do jobs. They don't hire them for charitable or philanthropic reasons. They do them because they require them. But it's the economy is not going to be transformed with this budget. What might be transformed, if it is also reformed, would be the NHS.
Well, this is the thing, let's get on to some of the sums then and talk about some of the detail. One of the things that Reeves said very clearly was that the Tories had effectively misled the country and the Office of Budget Responsibility with their last budget because they withheld information from them so that their forecast looked better than it should have been. She expressly said her budget's maths should not be compared to their budget's maths because their maths was significantly off, according to the OBR. Basically back of a fag packet stuff, so long as your fag packet was soaked in beer and when you're using your last crisp as a pen, it's that bad at maths. Now, so she said that they agreed they didn't budget. The Tories agreed, but did not budget for public sector pay rises, which she's had to find the money for. They apologised, but did not budget for compensation in the infected blood scandal and some postmasters, which amounts to just under 12 billion and 2 billion, respectively, for them. Kev, does she have a point here that the Tories should have budgeted for all that? I mean, obviously they should have budgeted for it, but Is it the case that all governments, especially those that know they're on the way out, are going to sort of promise stuff and leave someone else to pick up the bill? Or is there something spectacularly different about what the Tories did?
Yeah, it's normally gone wrong when you lose an election and the public have wised up and realised the Conservatives were dodging signing the cheques that accumulated on their watch. And you mentioned public sector pay, blood, the post office, for instance. The cap on bus fares was only funded until the end of this year at £2. Labour will continue at £3 next year, which is a 50% increase, quite a big increase. So, hey, what happened to the green transformation when you're going to have to pay more to go on a bus, but you'll pay relatively less to fill up your car? I think that green transformation has gone out the window, disappearing in a rear view mirror when it comes to transport. But I think the Tories did push it, stretch it close to breaking point. But the OBR isn't as harsh on them as she'd spun in advance. But there's no doubt the two decreases in national insurance paid by employees, which has gone down from 12 to 8% on every pound you earn over £12,500 to up to £50,000. It's 2% after that. They hadn't funded it, and she's partly funding that now through the rise, the 1.2% rise for employers. They're basically subsidising those cuts to employees under the Conservative time. So no, they play pretty slyly, and she's now maximising the politics out of it.
Yeah, it's kind of the way it should have gone. I'd have thought at the time. If you're going to cut it for employees, then you really should have. You've got to put it on somewhere else, and employers. Yeah.
Well, if you remember, 1.2%, isn't that the increase? Wasn't that around the increase that Boris Johnson imposed on employers and employees to fund the NHS in 2022?
His was 2%.
Yeah, fund social care. It got reversed by Rishi Sunak later on, but it was a clear manifesto break by the Conservatives where they had said they would not do that. The argument again about Labour breaking promises on working people, I think is a bit of a diversion. I think they're quite happy with a bit of a debate about that rather than getting into the substance of what they've done.
Yeah. So some of those on the left are going to be arguing and talking about the fact that there's austerity coming back now, and that this is a Tory-like government that's going to be bringing in cuts. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think the services can be cut, should be cut, that they can't be cut? Where do you want those cuts to fall if they have to come somewhere? Tracy says she lets carers go to work for another couple of hours. What about put up carers allowance for people who cannot go to work because of the amount of care that the person needs? We'll get to that in just a second, Tracy, because one of the things that she said, although there's no austerity, there are going to be 2% efficiency cuts to every Whitehall department. Everyone is going to have to find savings somewhere. There is going to be a COVID fraud commissioner to claw back some of the money stolen during the pandemic. We won't get the billions back, but we might get some millions. The minimum wage is going up. Eventually, the under 21s will earn the same as the over 21s. The carers allowance is going up. But only so that you can earn around, as Tracy was saying, around £10,000 before you lose the carer's allowance. That means that you can go back to work part-time and stuff like that while caring for a loved one. You don't immediately lose your carer's allowance for earning a smaller amount of money. Jason says, I rarely praise anything these days. Oh, Jason, what a shame. But the raising carers allowance threshold is good. Hooray! We've had a vote. Right. Let's see in the comments, everybody. Are you a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Do you think that the budget generally is okay, generally somewhere in the middle, or generally just very, very bad? Let us know. Just kind of have a simple thumbs up or thumbs down in the comments, and let us know what you think. The big ticket, like you said, though, Kevin, was the employers' national insurance contributions, which will not only go up by 1.2% in April, but now have to be paid on every employee earning not just a bit over $9,000 as they do today, but everyone earning over $5,000. So that brings in many, many more people working part-time, a lot of smaller businesses perhaps, but with maybe a dozen or so employees, a lot of self-employed people, maybe family firms. We're not quite sure how they're all going to be responded to it. How do you think they're going to react to this?
Yeah, if you're self-employed, the amount of national insurance you pay is not going up any more than it's not going to go up for somebody who's employed. But if you are an employer, your bill, the cost of employing somebody will go up. Now, of course, that will that will be eaten into profits. It's how much of that is passed on in higher prices and charges if they can be imposed. How much is that going to be in lower pay rises for workers in the future? There's no doubt that money has got to be found somewhere, and that's what we wait and see. But again, looking at the forecasts, there's no economic catastrophe from it. There is no huge surge in unemployment, but somebody's going to pay. There's no doubt. It's rather like when the minimum wage goes up for the 1.5 million or so who get it. That is an increase in the costs of employing them. But I think it's a good thing, not just for the workers, but also the benefits bill is reduced, because at the moment we subsidise low wages with universal credit, which so much of which goes to people in work, not those out of work. And so that the cost is transferred onto the employer.
It should save money and benefits somewhere, but it should also, obviously, that money doesn't go into a black hole. It doesn't go into a pocket and disappear. You're not giving it to Rishi Sunak and he's going to California with it. It's being spent in this country. It's being, in the system. It's helping to do things in the economy, whatever they may be. Leslie says it's a thumbs up from her. The non-dom status has gone. There's VAT on private schools, neither of which are going to affect working people. Are there any parents out there who work very hard to send their children to private schools? I bet you may have a different opinion. Now, what are we getting then in return for some of these cuts and some of the other things? What I've mentioned from some of it. Rich is a thumbs up too. So 12 million pensioners are going to get up to £475 extra in their state pension if they last the winter. Gillian's a thumbs up as well. 865,000 businesses won't have to pay any NICs, no national insurance contributions. Around another million will pay very low rates. Air fuel duty, it may put £2 on a quick flight to Alicante, but it's going to whack Taylor Swift with an extra £450 per passenger on
You can afford it.
She can afford it, so can Rishi Sunak. Pubs, cafes, restaurants getting 40% rates relief. Non-DOMs are going, but there is going to be a new residency status where we have competitive tax rates. Extra 2% stamp duty when you sell a second home. What a shame. Gillian says, my heart is hardly breaking for those who can afford to buy a second home who are now paying more in stamp duty rates. If they're paying $500,000 for a second home or a buy-to-let, they can afford another 10. Anyone out there disagree? Because I can't say that I do. And of course, we've got treating private schools as the businesses that they actually are and have always been, pretty much paying the tax and business rates they've been allowed to dodge for years, and which benefits only those 6% of children who actually attend those schools. But Kevin, there's been all this chatter about whether Labour is keeping its manifesto promises or breaking them. And the Tories are desperate to say that they're breaking them because they want to prove that the country was wrong by voting for the other guys. But correct me if I'm wrong. Is it just me? This looks to me like exactly the sort of thing that Britain voted for, taxing the toffs, and a big change from the economic status quo that we had before. This is what we wanted. I know.
I think the real problem for Starmer and his campaign to restore trust in politics, which I think is probably broken, possibly over the winter fuel allowance cut, which was never in the manifesto. Possibly over him taking free clothes, actually more so than the events he went to, is during the election campaign, it was repeatedly said by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who are pretty good judges and experts, that neither Labour nor the Tories were being honest about the scale of the tax rises that would be facing whoever was in government, unless services were going to be absolutely slashed. And so I think there was that shiftiness. I think we always knew taxes would have to go beyond what Labour was saying on non-DOMs and on private schools. I mean, private schools, the class war has been by the Conservative Party against kids in state schools. We're spending no higher now than it was in 2010 when they first took power, and that increase in VAT on school fees will go to fund extra teachers, thousands of extra teachers, free breakfast clubs. It'll go to help the 94% of kids who go to the real public schools, the state schools, not the private schools. So I can see why the Tories and I find a lot of people, senior people in the media, newspapers, TV, radio, are all obsessed by private school fees, and that's because they went themselves or have their own kids there.
Yeah,
that's why as an issue, it gets far more coverage and airtime than it deserves.
Yeah, and that's why when you see the Tory backbenchers all sort of throwing their order papers up in the air, the idea of 2% stamp duty on a second home, well, that's because they've all got a second home.
I tell you, when I look at that budget, in some ways, I wish it just increased capital gains tax to the same rate as income tax. I don't see why somebody getting unearned income should be paying a lower rate of tax than somebody who's having to earn their income with hard work, graft.
Yeah.
It just kind of strikes me as wrong. She's going to raise a lot more money.
Well, perhaps at the step 2 socialist, maybe. Who knows? John on Twitter says nobody's talking about the help for carers or the increase in the minimum wage or the house building or investment. It's just tax that people are talking about. There's nothing about breakfast clubs, building new schools, hospitals, railways, trams, energy. Why not? This is what we're talking about, John. This is what we are here for. That's what we're doing. Diana on Twitter says, I'm cautiously not disappointed. Other than that, I wish they'd raise petrol taxes rather than train fares. We haven't figured out how to tax the use of electric vehicles. There's stuff that wasn't in there. So there wasn't stuff about winter fuel payments. There wasn't anything about sort of helping pensioners through that. There wasn't really any specific mention of self-employed people. Although, like you say, national insurance, doesn't cover sole traders. If you've got, say, a personal service company, it might affect you. People who are sort of setting something up, there's no real specific mention of that. And there's something like 20 odd million people now who are self-employed in our economy. They're a big enough section of the economy. They should have had a mention.
Yeah, many of them are not on big money, because a lot of the growth in self-employment is basically being companies pushing workers out and saying they just want to basically have pay for them on contracts, so they don't have to pay employers' national insurance contributions. Yeah. For instance, they can save it. They can reduce. You can reduce your pension contributions. No, but she didn't. I think if we go through it, there'll be a lot of people who weren't mentioned. But there's, like, for instance, miners and their widows in coalfields are going to get back money that's been kept from their pension fund. The government's been taking half the surplus in the big pension fund. They're going to get it back, and they'll get. I think I saw the figure of 20 odd quid a week rise in their pensions because of that. She didn't mention that. It's there in the details. Yeah,
there's a couple of, and it'll take a few days for some of these details and their reporters to go through those big thick books, everybody, to find the stuff that is the real, perhaps some of the stuff that will be the overarching story of this budget. It will take a few days for some of this stuff to filter out. Fluxus on Twitter says, amen, it's one of the most professional, well thought out budgets in decades. Bravo, Labour. You've got a fan on here, Kev. Where's he gone? I just saw him now. Oh yeah, someone calling himself the Gob. I don't know what he might be. Kevin Maguire is a known who cannot show his face in his hometown of Sunderland. I think you probably can, Kev. But there was a brief mention of Sunderland, wasn't there? A specific jobs.
I know. It's the big studio development. It's not my hometown anyway. I'm from South Shields, which is just north of it. But apart from it not being my hometown, and the fact I was there on Saturday, got to see Sunderland Oxford, we won 2-0. So I can't show my face in the town I was in. That's not my hometown. He's spot on. Well done, mate. Back of the net.
There you go. I think you've solved that one, Kev. Now, what do you think, everybody? How do you think generally that the budget has gone? Has it been a professional one? Has it been an amateurish one? Has it been one that you were expecting? Was it of a surprise? There were one or two things in there that people weren't expecting. We've got a bit of good news we're coming to at the end. But first off, the one biggie, which you mentioned earlier, Kevin, is a whopping £22 billion extra for day-to-day spending on the NHS to bring down those waiting lists, and £3 billion to invest in future health needs. But should be pointed out, although Massimo says this is the most realistic budget ever, it's still some way short of the 40 billion odd black hole in the health service that it actually faces, that it needs this extra every year. And there's only £1 billion set aside to refurbish hospital buildings. The latest estimate, Kev, is that it's 3 billion in London alone and 14 billion nationwide. How is Wes Streeting going to make 1 billion go 14 times as far?
Yeah, and you haven't mentioned the words social and care. So it's a start, isn't it? It has to be sustained investment year after year. That's what it is. You can't just have a big splurge because you can't spend the money properly. You have to plan to get it in. But if you can begin to get the waiting lists down, and they should start to fall because there's no junior doctor strikes now. They've been they've been resolved, you can begin to turn it around. But as Rachel Reeves said, as Keir Starmer would say, as Wes Streeton, the Health Secretary, would say, at the same time, you've got to shift from hospitals to community. You've got to go from treatment to prevention. And I think she used it from an analog to a digital age. You've got to use more tech. And you can turn it around, but it will take some time, because you've got to, as you reform it, you've got to continue treating people. You've got to dealing with them. You can't just say, right, I'm going to shut up shop and completely renovate it and start again.
No, as Richard says there, it's a kind of a sort of cautious welcome from him. He's going to be worse off, but hopefully his children would be better off, and he hopes they'll move out at some point in the future. Has there ever been an NHS technical upgrade, Kev, that hasn't gone over budget and has done what it was supposed to?
No, the last Labour government wasted, was it 10, 12, 13 billion pounds? Gigabillions. Got taken to the cleaners. I know. What annoys me, if banks, building societies, all sorts of other companies can have technical systems, IT systems that work, why can't the NHS have a nice system? I mean, look, it's got better in many ways. I don't know if you go to your GP, but I go now and mine call up the records very quickly. Doesn't have to get an old brown envelope out from a file anymore and leaf through me notes, can book his appointments, get diagnostic results. But it just needs a bit better. And of course, since COVID, many of us have the app, and you can see your treatment, your record.
I think the unfortunate problem with my GP is that they've got the digital records, but they're using 1,000-year-old PCs.
Yeah, well, that's when it got hacked, didn't it? Some time ago. Yeah, some old Windows operating system.
Exactly. Is it any wonder the Russians can get in there? They probably, Soviet era PCs. It's ridiculous. So,
put another bit of coal in the engine.
Well, so I think overall then we've pretty much got through most of the budget. People seem to be cautiously welcoming of it, not highly delighted, but cautiously happy. I think if you want to really cash in, firstly, go to the pub tonight and have yourself some draft beer, because it's only draft beer that is getting the duty relief on the taxes. But we have managed to find one piece of good news for everybody in the budget, and here it is. Now, a couple of other surprises were things like £1 billion for special educational needs, HS2 finally getting all the way to London as it was supposed to. But perhaps the biggest net gain of the budget for most of our viewers is going to be, Kev, an end to fiscal drag. Can you explain it to us?
Yeah, fiscal drag is essentially you get a pay rise and you could start paying a higher rate of tax, because the tax thresholds at which you start paying income tax have been frozen, say, 2 years now, is it? At first £12,500 you earn, you pay no tax. After that, every pound from 12,500 to 50,000, so that's what, 37,500 pounds there, you pay 20% tax on. And after 50,000, every pound after that, up to I think it's 125,000 or thereabouts, that's 75,000, you pay 40p on each of those pounds, and after 125 or so, you pay 45. So what happens if you get pay rises, you go into the next bracket. So just say if you're on 49,000, you'll be paying a 20p rate. You go to 51,000, the 1,000 over that 50, you'll be paying 40p in every pound in tax. That's what fiscal drag is, just keeping them there. Your pay rises mean you go into a higher tax bracket. But instead of extending that to 2030, as we thought, Reeves is going to start increasing it by inflation again. But not until 2028. So you've got another 4 years of it.
There is some news.
Yeah,
not quite
yet. A lot of revenue. It brings in a lot of revenue for the. I think it's sneaky, and the Conservatives were doing it. But if she says I'm not going to do it, she'll have a big black hole of her own in the budget. And all that extra cash for the NHS or extra cash for schools, well, it could just disappear and be filling the black hole. So you've got to make a choice in life.
It's got to come from somewhere.
Public services have got to be paid for.
Yeah, it does mean that, when you've been earning the same amount, excuse me, and inflation, maybe you got a pay rise, but inflation means that you're actually not, in real terms, you don't have anything extra. You're paying an extra tax.
Well, you have less extra.
You have less.
You have less extra.
So you get a bit extra, but
you don't pay. Yeah, you only pay it on the money that's in the higher tax band. It's not all of your money. There's a lot of misunderstanding on this. Of course, you've also got national insurance, which kicks in and is 8% now on every to 12,500. You pay no national insurance. Then after 12,500 up to 50,000, you pay 8% on each pound between 12,500 and 50,000. Then if you get over 50,000, you're lucky to be over 50,000. You pay 2% on each pound after that. So it's a very complex system. Then if you're between 100,000 and 150,000, you lose your personal allowance gradually, and you get a very high tax rate of about 60%.
Yeah. But basically what it was after with inflation, so even though you might earn more money, in real terms your purchasing power was just the same as it always used to be, and you didn't actually feel any richer whatsoever, but you're paying more tax on it because you've gone up a band. And that is going to end because they're going to stop freezing those bands. They're going to move with inflation, hopefully, at some point. And you'll stay in the band that you were always in, therefore.
Yeah, Foxy, you'll be pleased to know the good news is the Office for Budget Responsibility, who check all the sums, say household real disposable incomes will be higher at the end of Rachel Reeves' period than at the beginning. Bad news is there won't be much higher.
So what are we talking about? 1%, 2%?
Yeah, I can't remember now. I did see the figure. I don't think I'll be buying that Spanish villa.
Right, so it's enough for a pint, basically. But
a few pints.
You won't be any worse off, in theory.
No, you'll be better.
Which is probably for the best. And the whole, that Rishi Sunak warned they're going to break Late Britain in 100 days hasn't actually happened.
No, well, go remember the last Parliament, and there were, in the defence of the Tories, there was the pandemic and there was the bit of Putin invasion of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. It was the worst for living standards, in history, or certainly living memory.
Yeah, and that's where we are. So it's been cautiously welcomed. I suppose the Tories are very cross about it, but it does seem to be more competent and professional. It does seem to be fairly clear, actually. We haven't found any sort of hidden bits yet, but I suppose we have to wait over the next couple of days and see what comes out. Thank you very much, Kevin, for taking us through all that. Thank you, everyone, for taking. And we will see you again on Monday after half term. Mercifully, they're back to school for our next edition of the News Agenda, and we will see you all then. Take care, stay safe. Bye.